Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode, Liwai Garcia joins us to discuss her research study in which she interviewed 45 autistic and ADHD leaders who disclosed their disability in the workplace. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. V, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
My pleasure.
I'd love to start out by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
I wrote down one-word notes for these questions, and this one I've got socks, wolves, and Hannah Gatsby. So let's start there. For me, socks is kind of where my journey started because it's one of my most vivid memories when I was very, very small of sensory issues because I could not stand my socks, any socks in any shoes, because of that line at the edge, that terrible, evil line at the very end of the sock that would get all crunched up in my shoe. Like, even now, I can't handle it. So that was my first memory, was just being so upset about the socks and no one being able to help because they didn't understand why I was upset by this constantly. I since over the years developed, of course, a way to get around that. I have a very specific method of putting them in my sock folded. It's a whole process. But I managed to figure that out. So in my mind, my journey with autism includes sensory issues like that, and then wolves. So I was terrified of wolves for the longest time because of what the media led us to believe about wolves. And so, for some reason, to me, to very little me, the idea of being terrified by a thing meant that I should research the thing so that I would get a better understanding of whether or not that was accurate to be afraid. So I researched wolves and learned that how they were portrayed in media and children's cartoons, not at all accurate. And then I became obsessed with them. So they were my first special interest and have continued through my life as just the animal that I love the most. And then lastly, Hannah Gatsby. So I am late diagnosed to autism, even though it's been there since the very beginning. I didn't realize there was a word for what I am until I saw one of Hannah Gatsby's clips. I could not think or breathe or speak anything except wolves. And that diagnosis explained everything.
Why can't we just eliminate socks altogether?
That would be even better. They're created as torture devices.
My dog doesn't wear any socks, and she seems to be able to go through life just fine. I just don't understand it.
Wolves don't wear socks. All the best creatures don't need socks. I don't see why we should.
Absolutely. Now, on social media this past month, you publicly stated for the first time that you are autistic. I know that can come with some conflicting emotions and so much to process. I'm wondering, what emotions have you been feeling, V, and where are you at in your process of what your autism specifically means to you?
Where I started when I was first thinking about disclosing publicly a few years ago. But then I had the most horrific and traumatizing experience at work by disclosing my autism to a new boss and having the worst consequences of doing that. So that changed my mind. And for several years, I'd been in hiding again because it's a secret, air quotes, that I'd kept for many, many years professionally. And so for me to disclose recently took a lot of courage, and it was linked directly to the research project that I'm doing, which is on 45 autistic and ADHD leaders who disclose in the workplace because their situation is similar to mine. And I wanted to study if more people had experiences like mine, where you disclose in the workplace and then all of these negative effects happen. So I wanted to put my research out into the world, but to do that, I felt I needed to disclose as part of that process, both for honesty, for context, and also because it felt like it was time. I had already talked about at a presentation what had happened to me in the workplace and my autism, but to go public on my LinkedIn meant that my old connections, everyone would see it. People who've known me for over 16 years, sometimes longer. And that was terrifying, but I felt it necessary for the reasons I stated, and also because I don't feel there is enough representation of autistic people in leadership, let alone anywhere, frankly. So with it also came this sense of relief and doing it for the right reasons. That yes, I was incurring all of this risk because future employers can hop online, look at my profile, and then discriminate against me all again. But perhaps that's fine. Perhaps weeding out people who don't want us is not such a bad thing after all. Save myself some time and energy and pain while being authentic and standing fully planted in who I am and why I have been successful in my career. So people can't just take the autism diagnosis piece of us, they have to take all of us. That includes our autism, which in my case has really fueled my entire career. Without my autism, I would not have become a vice president at that past organization. I would not have been as successful. So you can't just take the parts of us that you find palatable or that you like or that you are knowledgeable about. You have to take all of us like any human being. So I feel now that I've done it, just joy and acceptance from my community. I had a few brave souls from my old community post or comment on my post, just such incredible words of support. So I know that the right people will find me now, and I can find them while also serving as a positive example for other autistic people who may understandably be too terrified to disclose or to reveal themselves in public. There are others of us who can be out there showing ourselves on their behalf until they're ready, or maybe they never will be, and all of that is fine. I do feel it is my responsibility now. And also, honestly, I thought of the deathbed scenario. I was thinking, well, I don't want to die and not have ever lived authentically. That would be so sad. So that's another reason that I did it. And lastly, and I'll probably touch on this later, the word audacity came up in my research when I was studying these 45 autistic and ADHD leaders. and I did feel a bit of audacity.
Now, speaking about your research study, that's where I had the honor to initially meet you. And your research study is Disclosure Should Not Be a High Risk Calculation, in which you interviewed 45 autistic and ADHD leaders who disclose their disability in the workplace. What did you learn about this calculation that might be most alarming from those of us that you interviewed?
How life ruining it can be. I experienced the same and I understand, but to really get the depth of people's experiences, because our people can be very candid and also very verbose and prolific. And they were all of these things in their responses. And I read every single word. And in doing so, really went down that path of understanding what happened to some of these folks. And there were the most painfully heartbreaking things. And to give you context, I pulled a few of the quotes that kind of touched me, that spoke to your question about what was alarming. And I'm going to read them now to you so that I can amplify their voices, because so many of us were silenced and dehumanized in the disclosure process that it only seems fitting to give them as many platforms as I can. So here are some of the things that they said. I'll go one by one. I felt like a criminal. I lost my income, my health insurance, and am back on government support. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have six-figure student loans, multiple degrees, a family, and no options. I felt violated, scrutinized, traumatized, isolated, excluded, and was ultimately hospitalized as a result of the stress and detrimental treatment. I no longer have the confidence to pursue or hold manager roles versus individual contributor roles. I was yelled at by managers and called a liar because I was able to speak and pay attention to some things. I was laughed at and humiliated in meetings and treated like I was not capable to perform my role despite extremely strong evaluations and outputs. They made me feel small. So, those were some of the words that came up in my study of these 45 leaders. And other things that I found deeply disturbing when I crunched the numbers were that 69% of these 45 leaders experienced negative health and well-being impacts. And of that number, 48% of those specified that it was long term. I define long term as 1 year or longer. Also, the ultimate result of disclosure, like the objective outcome of what happened after they disclosed, 60% of them had a negative outcome. And then 62% said that after they disclosed, colleagues privately expressed support but publicly failed to intervene or advocate. That was disappointing and surprising that that was their top byproduct of disclosure, because you need your allies around you when you're doing something hard, and to have them in private try to support you, but when it mattered in public where everyone can see where you're being humiliated, that's where the support is withdrawn. It is crushing. And so those are some of the most alarming things that I found when I spoke to these 45 leaders. But despite all of that, I did find hope, because in the open response, in some of these interviews and the survey portions, I found people talking about community, about resilience, the motivations for disclosure being things that were touching and important, meaningful, like they wanted to disclose to serve as a positive example to other autistic, ADHD, and disabled folks who couldn't. And I'm going to end this answer with my favorite positive quote from the study because I didn't want to leave everyone sad. And my favorite positive quote was, I believe in leaning into who I am in order to help change the world for the better. That's been resonating with me in my own life. And also one of the reasons that I disclose publicly on LinkedIn, and I'm going to continue to do so because autism is part of who I am. It's a fundamental piece of my makeup. And by leaning into it and choosing to live out loud, I believe that I can help change the world for the better. If I remain in the shadows, I can't do that.
Thinking about community and belonging, I'm wondering from talking to the 45 leaders in your study, did you get a sense of what actually having community and belonging in the workplace might actually look like in practice?
Yes, belonging looks like representation. 17.8% said that they needed open representation of other autistic, ADHD, and disabled leaders in the workplace to feel safe. Belonging looks like colleagues privately expressing support and publicly following through, expressing their support, intervening, and advocating for us. Belonging looks like courage. These 45 leaders risked all the potential harm of disclosure, in some cases, just to be a positive example to others of what it can look like to live out loud in the workplace as a leader. And 27% of the 45 said that's why they disclosed, or one of the reasons. And I want to be clear again, this is not required. Disclosure is not required. The burden and responsibility of fixing systems is not and should not be on us. But I wanted to specifically honor the choices of those who did decide to risk everything to serve as a positive example to others. And belonging looks like mixed teams. That means disabled folks and non disabled folks working together, often led by a disabled leader. And belonging looks like clear policies about disclosure, transparent processes about how to disclose. This is an acknowledgement of we know as a company that disabled workers exist in our company, whether or not they have disclosed. And so let's create clear pathways for them to get whatever support they may need to make their job smoother. And belonging looks like ERGs led by disabled people with executive buy-in. In my own experience at previous company, I tried to establish one because I was an executive leader and I was told no, that the CEO in consultation with the lawyer said that we couldn't have ERGs. It was too risky. It would risk discriminating against other people. And I was like, I don't understand. These groups, it wouldn't just be the several that I proposed, which were a group for disabled professionals in the company, a group for queer folks in the company, a group for people of color in the company. These are the groups that I proposed, but I said there should also be others that other employees suggest. But for some reason, I don't believe that the reason I was given was the real reason I wasn't allowed to set up these ERGs. I think it honestly had to do with risk and control and hassle or misperceptions. And belonging also looks like providing basic accommodations and supports to all without requiring disclosure in the first place. Many accommodations are universal and could and should be adopted by most, if not all, employees in the company. It's not just autistic, ADHD disabled professionals. Accommodations are viewed as this special request that we make when honestly everyone can benefit. So universal accommodations for all. Belonging also looks like educated managers and leaders who don't fall back on harmful stereotypes and who have actually received formal training. Because this came up a lot in the open response about how the bullies were often from management, they were from upper leadership. When these autistic and ADHD leaders disclosed, these are the people who were bullying them quite often. So, educating these leaders and managers and having a zero tolerance for bullying and then following through on it. Because my other company said they were against bullying, but when you look at the results, that wasn't the case. So, to actually follow through on implementing these no tolerance bullying policies is critical to creating a sense of belonging because belonging is based on trust, safety, and feeling accepted. And I would also say that belonging looks like an autistic, ADHD, or disabled leader disclosing in the workplace and being met with openness and acceptance instead of consequences.
Now, V, recently you presented your findings at the Neurodiversity Science Conference. What did you think are some of the most important things that maybe we haven't discussed yet for people to know about your study and these findings?
So, first, 62% of these 45 leaders felt bad about their disclosure process, how the company handled it, their company's response. And I went in actually thinking that that number would be higher. So, in my mind, that's hopeful. That's a bit of optimism that we can cling to, that not everybody had a negative or felt bad about their disclosure experience. However, that is way more than half. That is a problem. So that's something to keep in mind that people who are disclosing are scared. They A lot of courage is required of them to do it. And what happens to them generally can be not good. It can be harmful. So to perhaps for others have empathy to those who are going through this process, who are considering disclosing in the workplace. And then, as is one of my emerging themes, support them publicly as an ally within the company. Another interesting aspect in my study that came up is for those with marginalized racial identities, their number one variable to feeling safe as an openly autistic or ADHD leader is representation. So there were 23% who said representation. That was their number one variable. I also want to mention that for those with marginalized racial identities, in my study, 0% felt good about their disclosure experience, process, and the company's response to their disclosure. Contrast that with 19% of those who felt good from non-marginalized racial identities. So you think when you hear numbers like that about intersectionality and the importance of that being reflected in studies because we are not a monolith in any aspect. It also speaks to privilege because some folks who don't have the privilege of, let's say, a white male autistic leader disclosing will or can experience a completely different response. Also, the importance of listening. So listen to us. Listen to folks with multiply marginalized identities. Listen to queer people, people of color, etc. Just make sure that you allow space for experiences beyond your own. And in our talk here, when I'm saying you, I don't mean you specifically, Doug. I mean the broader world.
Well, I do have that privilege being white and being a male. That is, there's definitely that. When people talked about listening and giving space, were there specific things that people mentioned regarding those things? Because a lot of times I feel like it's just words that people will say, and not those that are from marginalized racial identities, but white people, white autistic people, white neurotypical people will say these words and will talk about these things on social media, but I don't necessarily believe them. So were there specific things that people in your study mentioned?
No, not specifically about that because I did not delve deep into that. But I would say that not rushing to be the first voice in the room or the first perspective in the room is helpful to allow those with marginalized identities around you to speak, to share opinions, and then after they do, to amplify them, not as a because I've had this happen before too, where I will give a perspective or an idea, and then the straight white man sitting next to me who's in executive leadership says the exact same thing, and I'm sitting there thinking, "Is there an echo in here?" So, not squashing or minimizing the perspectives and voices of these folks. That comes more from my own experience and my own thought than the survey itself or the study itself. But that's such a great question that you asked, and I appreciate you asking it because it does take courage to say that out loud and ask for input. I'll also say for the non-disabled folks, we don't owe you why we are the way we are. I even just recently last week so I'm a mobility aid user as well, and I had a non-disabled person ask me, "Why did I need a cane? And had I been in war?" And it came from a good place. It came from interest and concern. However, I felt odd about it, and I answered what I was comfortable with. But this has happened numerous times. I have been you're required at the airport, for example, to put your cane through the scanner, and I was nearby when someone grabbed my cane, which had, like, a raven at the top and a twirling black base, because if I'm gonna have to have a cane, I'm gonna do it in style, and that person picked it up and said, "Wow, this is cool. I mean, it's not mine. Oh god, I hope that I never have to use something like this. But I guess it's cool. Hope that never happens to me." Standing right there, buddy. So just put more thought into empathy, especially if your questions are coming from the right place. You might not need to ask it all. You shouldn't need to ask it all. Just kind of leave us our privacy. If we trust you, we'll share with you if we want to. And then if you must, think about how you're gonna word it. Think about someone asking you that.
I read that your work is guided by a simple philosophy to stand fiercely apart, yet deeply rooted in the collective. The word collective is one of my favorite words, by the way. Are there times when those principles are in direct conflict? And if so, how do you handle balancing them?
So the note that I wrote, the one word for this section was Mandalorian, because I recently watched the Mandalorian series. I'm behind everyone else, the entire world, but I recently saw the whole thing. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, the Mandalorians remind me of the autistic community because they are each very fiercely individual. Their armor is very customized, the colors that they use, the various enhancements. It's very individual. Who they are as people, how they respond to situations. They are sometimes lone wolves in the wild, exploring the galaxy, doing their thing. And then yet there is the community, the broader collective of Mandalorians that when they come together, they find kinship, belonging, immediate understanding, and a broader sense of culture, what culture looks like to them, which it doesn't look like to the rest of the galaxy. But for them, this is the way. And there's also, of course, the literal masking component that they are all masked. It's more complicated because as we found some of the Mandalorian sects, they do wear their mask. They don't wear their helmet. I say mask because of the autism stuff, but that is such a big deal within their culture too, whether you take your helmet off or not, whether you show yourself to the broader society of folks or not. So I just found a lot of resonance there. And I feel like a Mandalorian in the sense that I am able to juggle those two dualities and remain part of both. I can be myself deeply, fully, and rooted in myself, but also draw upon the greater collective of autistic people, of the disability community. And I don't find them in conflict at all. I've been navigating this since I was a child. The only difference is that until I got my diagnosis later, I didn't know who I was looking for instead to find my people. Instead, I would just spend so much of my time dreaming of my people, vague forms in my head out there in the world somewhere. And once I graduated from high school, I was going to find them. I knew it. This was my goal. And I eventually did because one, we tend to attract our own kind, the autistics, which I did. And I found other autistics. And two, after I got that word for what I was able to specifically go seek my people. And so for me, it is important to have both the individuality and the collective, because at the lowest point of my life, I needed the collective. I knew who I was. I was strong and all of that, although albeit shaken because of what happened after I disclosed. But I needed the strength of the greater group, just like the Mandalorians when they come together, they say we're stronger together. It's so true. And it was the community of autistic folks, of the disability community that helped rebuild me to even to be here today. It was because of the collective as well as individual striving. And also, lastly, one more reference, The Last Unicorn, the book, and then they made a movie. So my experience as a tiny autistic when I was little, and when I was a child, was I knew that my people were out there in the world. I couldn't be the last unicorn. There were other unicorns in the world, and I just needed to know that they existed and were out there and were fine. And that's why it kind of was my life search, because I needed to know where they were. And now that I do, I take great comfort in knowing that my people are out there. I don't have to be with them all the time or interact with them all the time, but I take great comfort in the fact that they exist.
And how can our listeners learn more about and connect with you beyond this conversation?
LinkedIn. So everyone can send me a connection request and I will accept it. Unless you're transphobic or racist, then don't bother. but you can find me on LinkedIn. It's V dash Liwai, Liwai dash Garcia, Garcia. In case you're wondering about the middle name, that is my Hawaiian name, and it means cold water that makes you shiver because my ancestors were voyagers, because I am native Hawaiian. And there was a bit earlier that I had jotted down that I wanted to circle back around to if you're okay, and just share these last bits with folks. So this was when you asked me about presenting my findings at the Neurodiversity Pride Science Conference and some of the important things for folks to know about those findings. So I also wanted to share that 73% of my 45 leaders reported that their intersectional identities influence their disability disclosure experience. So that's another thing to keep in mind for folks. And also, their top three reasons for disclosing were to explain communication or work style differences, be that positive example we talked about, and to ask for accommodations. I think sometimes people believe we just cool boys to ask for accommodations, but amongst these 45 leaders, that wasn't the case. Mm. And community, allyship, and knowledge were the top three resources they felt would have been most helpful during disclosure. And then I can end with one aspect so this is the audacity piece, because I think it will be a fitting way to conclude, because it made me think about disclosure differently than I had before. So, one of the best conversations that I had with a leader in my study was about audacity. They brought it up and they said they decided to disclose immediately when they entered a new company, despite what had happened to them before. They phrased it as, "It's up to them to be good enough for me." And they phrased it as, it wasn't, "Will they accept me?" but, "Will I accept them?" That leader had decided to step up for themselves because they said in their experience, no one else would do it. And they bring their audacity everywhere, to the disclosure process, to tests for safety, to stand up for others in their company, to stand up for themselves and what's right, what's fair. And that audacity matters, especially to folks who can't yet be so bold, who may never feel safe enough to be that bold. And it matters so much for us to know, like the last unicorn, that there are those of us out there who are audacious, who have the audacity to stand up for what is right, to advocate so openly. And there is power in audacity. I experienced it myself in disclosing publicly, in doing that science conference where I talked about my own personal experience with disclosure and what led to my study. I feel that it's here now in being on Autism Stories, something that I would not have done a year ago or even a month ago. And when you and I first met, I remember that was something that I told you. I said, "Someday I want to come on your Autism Stories podcast and do this, but I'm not out yet. I'm not living out loud yet." I am now, and it feels great.
And I'm so glad you did, and so glad that we had this conversation, and really grateful for you, V. So thanks so much for being here.
It was an honor, a privilege, and I appreciate all that you do to uplift our perspectives. It matters more than you know.
Thanks so much to V for the conversation. To learn more about V, please check out the link in the description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you after listening to this episode. on how might the disclosure process change if an autistic employee asked, "Will I accept this workplace?" instead of only worrying, "Will they accept me?" Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through customized life coaching. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.